Hello, everyone. Welcome to Decoding Parenthood, where we unleash the secrets of happy parenting. Today, we have Miss Macarena Fernandez, who is a speech language pathologist, and we will be discussing and talking about challenges relating to speech and language. So, welcome, Miss Macarena
Thank you for
Fernandez.
having me.
Yeah, we are honored for you to be here. If you can just introduce yourself to our listeners and our viewers, that would be great.
Yeah. So, my name is Macarena Fernandez. I am a speech language pathologist and a board certified behavior analyst. I've been practicing since 2010. I got my undergraduate degree at the University of Maryland, College Park in speech language pathology. My master's from the George Washington University in speech and hearing sciences, and my certificate in behavior analysis from the Florida Institute of Technology.
As she mentioned, she does have her own practice, but she mainly does in-home therapy and she also goes to schools. We will be talking a lot about speech and language delays and how, as parents, what we can do to help cope up with that. What are the common issues you see that the parents are facing when it comes to their children?
So that's a good question. So the majority of the phone calls I get, so as I mentioned before, I've been working with children with autism and other developmental disabilities for, the past 13 years. So a lot of the phone calls I get are related to possible speech and language delays, possible red flags with social pragmatic disorders, including autism spectrum disorder. So those are the majority of the phone calls I get for the early intervention clients. So especially as of late, I think really because of the pandemic and kids kind of being in home and not exposed to daycare facilities or even schools, we're seeing a little bit more children that need more special attention as relates to language, communication, speech, even reading. So those are the kind of the phone calls recently that I've been getting.
Do you feel like you see more cases now than, maybe 3 years ago, like pre-COVID?
I don't know if I see more cases. I think maybe parents are a little bit more aware just because during the height of the pandemic, we were put in position where we were in home with our children and were able to spend more time with them. So some of the red flags may have been a little bit more apparent to them. So I don't know if it's a rise in cases or if it's just people are more aware and speaking about issues. And also maybe the good news is because of the awareness of early intervention that parents have just been reaching out more to, to service providers for additional help.
How does the language delay affect them in school?
That's a really good question. So I'll start with early on. So with your preschool age kids or even as early as 18 months, the language delays can impact them socially. And then as the kids get older, it can impact them academically. So there is a research to support that kiddos who have language delays early on that aren't really remediated are going to continue to have difficulties in academics as they get older. And that includes reading and writing and that verbal and written expression. So, it impacts them early on socially by establishing relationships with peers and also other adults. And we can go into, more specifics. I think of children in the daycare settings that I see and that, it's important for kids to learn how to advocate for themselves, to request help to their teachers or even advocate for themselves with their peers. So, but it impacts them socially and important for them to know how to kind of act in the classroom, but to both adults and to peers.
Like what signs or what am I looking for in a child? Like when should I start, getting help, or when do I, what exactly, like as a parent who might be a first-time mom and they don't know, is it normal? Like,
Yes.
my child is 1 and is not saying anything.
Yeah.
Should I go get help? Like, can you maybe give us a step down on like what age developmental
Yes.
wise?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, first, I want to say that the age of what's considered normal or typical, it is a spectrum. So while one child may be developing at a faster pace, it doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with the child. With that said, there are certain red flags that I would recommend looking for at an early age. If at least by one, the child isn't saying at least one word. Babbling happens really early on in infants. So always make sure that your child is babbling back to you, that, even infants make eye contact really early on. So eye contact, babbling, 1 year old, they're at least saying one word to communicate. That can be anywhere from requesting their wants and needs or even commenting about their environment. Um, so those are kind of the red flags. Eye contact, babbling. And then by 2 years old, they should be able to combine at least two words into phrases. And then kind of also what's important too that I don't want to forget to mention is how are they playing? So their play skills are really important. I don't expect a 1 or 2 year old to necessarily be engaging in imaginative play, but I do expect a 1 to 2 year old to play with toys how they're intended or play creatively with their toys. Ask their parents to play with them in very simple ways, or even ask a sibling to play with them. So independent play is really important, not just for building the child's creativity, but also for leisure skills. So those are kind of the things to look for in terms of red flags that I would tell most parents.
Are there any misconceptions parents should know about speech delay?
So what I typically tell parents and other practitioners is to kind of not take the wait and see approach. I think that if red flags such as not babbling or making eye contact or even responding to your name, if if parents are seeing those issues come up at home, definitely talk to your pediatrician. Um, Sometimes we do hear about it's it might be typical because there is a wide range of normal of what would be considered typical. Um, but as a parent, I would really encourage you to follow your gut. And if you think that something may be, if you feel like you need more support in an area, to speak to your pediatrician, and also in the areas of speech production and language production, I would recommend reaching out to a speech language pathologist.
What are your views, or what do you think how the schooling system has changed or evolved over the years? Like, do you feel like parents are more focused on the educational aspect and not focused on the,
Yeah,
the other things like social skills and life skills
yeah.
that are equally important?
That's a really great question. And I think that as a parent, I understand the need to want to focus on academics because, we think school and daycare, we go straight to wanting a curriculum. But what's important to recognize too is that those curriculums should be focusing on social skills at a very early age. Kids need to know how to problem solve. They need to know how to emotionally problem solve. An example of that would be kids need to learn how to wait. Waiting is really important. Parents and friends can't give them what they need immediately all the time, especially in this age of Amazon deliveries being so immediate or the internet being so immediate or YouTube clicks. I have a 2-year-old and I know when she sees a commercial on YouTube, she has issues waiting. So my husband and I are actively teaching her, like, listen, it's okay. You don't have to whine or say, whatever in order to get the show immediately. So waiting, accepting no, functional life skills, be able to tie your shoes, eating with a spoon. I also think as parents, we want to help our children right away instead of letting them kind of make simple mistakes in their environment. That those little mistakes are what are essentially teaching them. So while academics and learning letters and numbers is very important, I also think it's even more, I can argue it's even probably more important between the ages of 0 to 4, even 0 to 5, to really work on that social maturity before a child is even ready to access more of academic kindergarten readiness.
What do you think about multiple languages now that, we're so diverse and our neighborhoods are so diverse and many children speak more than one language? And parents always worry when, when they're putting them in school, is my child going to be behind in English?
Yeah.
But, do you think a child knowing multiple languages actually helps them or slows them down?
Yeah. So I'll answer this clinically first and then kind of like personally.
Yeah.
There is no research to support that being bilingual will delay a child in one language over the other. If anything, there is research to support that a child knowing two languages can help them. Um, if anything, maybe their vocabulary size in either language would be a little bit smaller, but
Mhm.
in total, they would still have the same amount of language or vocabulary size as if they're a monolingual child. So, what I encourage parents to do is to continue speaking in your native language. If it's important to you as a family, go ahead and do it. I know I come from a bilingual family. I was raised in a Spanish speaking family, and
Mhm.
my parents never strayed away from making sure that my sister and I were exposed to both languages. With that said, um, if we're in a situation where a child has a language disorder, that's kind of another thing to consider. So, a language disorder, a child, they're having issues learning language, they're going to have issues learning language in both languages. So,
Okay.
it's not a matter of that one native language
Mhm.
impacting the other language. So, again, I encourage families to do what's important to you and also to encourage professionals like speech language pathologists to be culturally competent and to talk and to speak with the families that they're working with to make sure that they know what's important to the families. And if
Yeah.
anything, I would look more into, well, what are you doing to enrich your child's language in general?
Mhm.
Reading is so important, especially at an early age.
Mhm.
Talking to them with pretty robust vocabulary, not like totally adult vocabulary, but I always encourage parents to speak to their children just kind of like their uh, they're little adults. I think we need to understand that kids are sponges and they pick up on a lot of things.
Mhm.
Speaking to their child or what their child is doing. An example, if your child is painting, you can say, "Oh my gosh, you're painting birds and those birds have wings and those wings help the birds fly." I love animals to talk about other animals. Just really expanding on language opportunities. I think that's what parents need to focus in on. And it can be in either language.
Mhm.
But the point is that you're spending time with your child, expanding their language in very fun opportunities. And that's how they'll learn.
When children have language delay or speech delay, it leads to some behavioral
Yeah.
problems because they're not able to communicate to their friend that they
Yes.
want something,
Yes.
right? How does, the delay affect the behavioral development in a child?
Yes. So what's important to consider is that behavior problems in young children are learned. And as parents, there's a lot that we can do to kind of set the stage to reinforce to positively reinforce the behaviors that we want to see in our children. So with kiddos that have language disorders and communication issues, it's important to give your child replacement language. So in the example of, well, my child kicks and screams when his brother or sister won't give him the stuffed animal. In those situations, I would say, okay, well, what is the behavior that you want to see? And the behavior that we would want to see in that moment is the child saying, can I have my teddy bear? Or in the very least, just say bear. So it's important for parents to realize that the environment plays a huge role. And if in that situation, if we do the other thing of, okay, I'll give you the bear after the child is screaming and crying is going to be the new form of communication. So the environment plays a big role. And for kids that are having issues communicating, they're going to need a little bit more extra teaching in how to communicate, so we can kind of work on those behavior problems from a very early age. And I think what's important for parents to kind of educate themselves on or reach out to other service providers is understanding behavior and what is socially appropriate behavior or behavior that we want to see or desirable behavior versus what the behaviors that we don't want to see. And also parents understanding just very simple learning principles of reinforcement is really important as well.
Two children are in school,
Mhm.
and one child bit the other child because they wanted the teddy bear.
Yeah.
Now the other child started crying, the child who got bit. The child who wanted the bear took the bear,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
And now the teacher is consoling and calming the child who got bit.
Mhm.
So if we don't want this behavior to be repeated,
Mhm.
what should the teacher be doing so that the child doesn't feel like I can bite whenever I want and I can get whatever I want?
Yes, that's a great question. A couple of things. First of all, in that moment, if the child who bit already did it and he got the toy, in that moment, and it really depends on the situation, but let's just say that this child takes well to the teacher giving them feedback, saying something like, "Listen, we don't bite.
Mhm.
Um, I'm going to take the teddy bear because it's not how we ask for things." So it depends on if the biting had already happened. What I would recommend to the teacher is if biting is an issue with a particular child or even multiple children in a classroom, we have to stay ahead of the game. So it takes a lot more observation to kind of stop the biting from happening and give the child a replacement behavior instead. So if we're kind of observing the child who tends to bite, interacting with another child, and we based on previous observation, we know that the child is more likely to if the child wants to train in this situation.
Mhm.
So this child that bites is really into trains and he's playing with a peer and the teacher's observing and the child is showing that he's about to go in for a bite. I would recommend the parent or the adult or the teacher to intervene in that
Let's
moment.
divert them.
Yeah, divert them, give them the
Mhm.
appropriate communication response of, "Can I have the train?" or "Train, please," or
Mhm.
even like very gently taking the train away, because that's all three of those are better than biting. And then really reinforce the child for using an appropriate method of communication. So
Okay.
it's kind of a twofold answer. And you have to know what to do if it happens. And then you have to be as preventative as possible to teach that replacement behavior in
So
the
after
future.
it happens,
Mhm.
right? Should the teacher be focusing and consoling the child who got bit, or should she be directly talking to the child who did it?
I think both. I think both are important because the child who got bit, needs to know that they're supported. If they need medical attention, by all means, that should be priority. I would, as quickly as possible, talk to the other child. Probably not give too much attention in the
Mhm.
event that attention is also a little bit reinforcing because we tend to see that sometimes. And it's not just about the bear.
It's
It's
also
also about the
about
teacher's attention. So again, that goes back to what I was saying before. Our parents be a little bit more educated on what reinforcement really is, because sometimes kind of reprimanding a child isn't the solution to the problem. It's kind of making the problem worse
yeah.
because they're seeking that adult attention.
So what age do you think, they usually grow out of those behavior problems?
So I wouldn't say that children grow out of behavior problems. I really want to put the emphasis on um, the child is always right in the sense that the environment teaches them. And that as parents and
Mhm.
caretakers, it takes a lot of hard work to teach kids from the very beginning. And that if we get into a situation where we are seeing a little bit more problematic behavior in terms of things like biting or yelling and screaming, we have to realize that children learn these things. Humans, behavior is learned. Um, and that um, it takes a lot of hard work on the caregiver part and on the adult part to undo those behaviors and teach replacement behaviors. So I wouldn't say that kids mature for sure. And as they learn more language and learn more
Mhm.
appropriate
Problem.
social skills,
Yep.
problem solving, then they're able to, then we might see a reduction in those behaviors that we don't necessarily want to see. But it's what we were talking about before is that problem solving is really important. And
Mhm.
sometimes that problem solving has to be adult mediated. And we have to teach the children how to engage in behaviors that we want to see. And that's okay. Sometimes it just takes a little bit extra practice and then you can kind of fade yourself away, but I wouldn't say kids necessarily grow out of it. It takes a lot of hard work on teacher and caregiver part. I tell parents often is behavior goes where reinforcement flows. So if a child is being taught that it's okay to act a certain way, they're going to continue to do that in the future until we kind of put a stop to it and teach them a more appropriate behavior.
So, what do you think? Like, what do you think are the advantages of a child learning sign language? Do you think that hinders the, learning speaking language?
No, I think if anything, I think it's great for them to learn sign, especially at an early age. But what I want to make an important point of is we want to kind of expand past the general signs of more or help or please by doing really simple things. So if we're going to teach our children this to sign more, to sign help, add more vocabulary to that. So if we teach them more, say something like, sure, oh, you want more apple? Yeah, I can give you more apple. Or you want more water? Sure, I'll give you more water. No problem. So kind of go past that one word to expose them to more nouns, and to also expose them to that longer phrase or sentence structure. We want to avoid situations where we're only teaching a child to sign more or help, especially with young kids that don't have the language to expand, because we want to avoid them, walking up to us and just doing this or even saying more. And then as the adult, you're like, oh, more of what? And then the child is frustrated and that's when they start to scream. And that's when they start to cry. And then as the adults, because we want the screaming and crying to stop, we start offering them things. So then
Right.
what just happens? They said more didn't work. Screaming and crying worked. So screaming and crying is going to be the communication in the future. So I think teaching sign language is wonderful, but expanding on that, I think, is the expanding it with more language after that is what's really important.
So how can we take, you know, my child goes to school, follows this schedule, has everything, you know, they do things throughout the day. Now when they come home, they are a whole different person,
Yeah.
right? And it's hard for some of the parents to understand that, their child is following a schedule and following those, consistency, the things throughout the day, and now they need a break.
Yeah.
How can we continue to still have, consistency even at home?
Yeah. We see this all the time, and I know that I experience it in our home too. I think that first of all, everyone wants a break when they get home, and that's completely natural. Everyone wants to watch TV or relax on the couch or do some type of leisure activity. Um, with that said, I think there's a balance between, when an educator is telling you, well, we follow a schedule at school. If we're then communicating, well, consistency is key. What we're not saying is you must follow a schedule when you get home at 5 p.m. because that's not realistic for most families. And it's everyone's tired. I think there is a balance. And I do think that, um, it's everyone's right to go home and have a more relaxed environment, but I do think that it's okay to still have ground rules that are general and to still remain consistent. And by consistency, I mean say what you mean and mean what you say. And an example of that is if you're going to tell your child to, hey, can you please pick up your toys? And they look at you and walk away, make sure that you follow through with what you're asking them to do, because walking away, if it's reinforced in that moment, it could happen again in the future. So there is a fine balance between like, hey, everyone wants to relax at home, no problem. But being consistent with your requests and being consistent with your environment is really important. And you don't have to do it in a way that's exhausting to you. But, kids do thrive from consistency and direction. And again, say what you mean and mean what you say is a common recommendation that I give parents because kids are smart and they're going to, when they're tired and they're hungry and, it's the end of the day, they're gonna try to pull things that they wouldn't necessarily pull at school. But it's like I said before, behavior goes where reinforcement flows. And it could be the case that at school, the children have learned over time, okay, well, my teacher is super consistent. They don't really let me get away with X, Y, and Z, but they give me so much attention for the things that I'm doing so well. So it's not just about you telling them no or being strict. It has nothing to do with it being strict. It has to do with being consistent.
But it also, many times parents are going to say, we're tired. We asked our child to clean up 5 times. They didn't listen. We just ended up doing it ourselves because at that point we were so tired. So we know that they know exactly what we're talking about, right? Because they understand. They're smart. Now, would you just cave in and would you clean up? Would you leave it a mess? Because it might drive you crazy at the end, right?
I'd say if a parent gave me that example, I'd say it's less exhausting to say, hey, Johnny, clean up your toys and kind of stand next to him to make sure he follows through with what you're asking him. Then by the 5th to 10th time that you've asked him, that's exhausting. It's less exhausting to take the 10 to 20 seconds to make sure that you're following through with what you're asking him to do, because then it's quick. And then you can be like, Johnny, you cleaned up your toys so well. I'm so proud of you. Thanks for helping mom. And what's important there is that you're giving him behavior specific praise and he knows exactly what he's getting praised for. And that's another point, is that we want to be really specific in the feedback that we give our children, because that's what helps them and empowers them and gives them self-esteem. It's it's not the end of the world if you're like, oh, good job, you're awesome. Everyone likes social praise, or most people like social praise. But what's even better to say is, you are such a good helper. You cleaned up all of your toys so quickly. And you even helped mommy wipe down the counters. Thank you so much. That's awesome. And then over time, we should see an increase in that. So to answer your question is, professionally, my advice is it is less exhausting to kind of stand there for 20 to 30 seconds to make sure Johnny cleans up his toys than
to keep on
repeating yourself, because it's over time, it's just going to keep happening. So it's better to just nip it right there. And in the future, if that social praise is important to Johnny, then he'll start cleaning up more immediately.
I also feel like as parents, we are so engrossed in everything that we need to get done that most of the time the praise doesn't happen. We just expect them to do it. Why do we have to praise them? But I feel like, I read it somewhere that for every time you ask somebody to do something or do a task, you need to end it with at least 5 positive reinforcements, because one negative can let you down. But then I also feel that, in children, the more you praise them for specific behaviors, it goes and then they continue to do those for their friends, like when their friends clean up.
Yes, that's a good point also, is that we want to catch the good behaviors and kind of work on the not so great behaviors. So and again, it takes a lot. It's hard work. This isn't easy. And being a parent isn't easy. But if we're just more in tune to the things that we're talking about to kind of make the environment more of a positive environment for everyone. And it is true. We want to give that praise and attention for desirable behaviors, and not necessarily only give that attention for when the child's engaging in something that's not so desirable. Because what could happen over time is that we could end up shaping or teaching the child that actually doing naughty things is going to get my parent to pay attention to me. So honestly, it's building a lot of awareness. And, we live in a day where iPads and computers and phones, we are so distracted. And we sometimes forget that, like, we don't have to be surfing on Instagram when our kids are next to us. So even if you take 2 minutes of the day to tell yourself, instead of doing this, I'm going to talk to my child and engage with them and be really explicit about the things I like that they're doing, or even being like, that painting's really cool. Can you show me how you did that? That goes a long way. So really focusing on talking to them about all the great things that they're doing, because they're probably doing a lot of great things throughout the day, and knowing what to do when they're kind of engaging in the undesirable behaviors as well.
Are there out of school services that parents can apply to their child to improve in these areas?
Yes, especially early on, early intervention services. All counties have public early intervention services, and you can just go online and find the right people to contact. So I'd really recommend making use of the county provided services. With that, and it depends on the needs of the family and the needs of the child
Mm-hmm.
also, that if they need extra support, there's also private services. And within private providers, you can have an in-network provider, which means it's someone that will accept your insurance and will bill insurance for you, or you can have an out-of-network provider. And those are providers that don't take insurance, but those out-of-network providers are happy to work with families to provide relevant documentation in order for families to submit for reimbursement themselves. And that really just depends on what a family's out-of-network coverage is like. So there's the public route and the private route. Sometimes a combination of both is very beneficial for different reasons. But the recommendation that I gave earlier is don't necessarily take the wait and see approach, especially with the wonderful options that counties can provide
Mm-hmm.
at a public and free level. It's better to just know from the beginning, very early
Mm-hmm.
on, if it's an issue or if it's not an issue, to know exactly what to do.
So, all of the information that you gave us about, language development and behavior issues in children, we greatly appreciate. We know that all our viewers and our listeners are going to appreciate all the, amazing nuggets you gave. Just to sum it up, it's very important to have a consistency,
Yeah.
as you mentioned.
Yep.
Children strive on consistency. They, whatever you decide as a family, everybody has to be equally involved in that.
Yep.
And, your behavior goes where reinforcement flows,
Yep.
which is great. Children are not born with certain behaviors. They are learning from the environment where they are in.
Exactly.
So, we thank you for coming and
having
we
me.
appreciate everything that you have shared with us. If you would like to reach Ms. Macarena Fernandez, her information will be in our bio. And thank you for watching and listening to Decoding Parenthood. Until next time, thank you.